The email arrived at 3:17 a.m., a stark digital scream in the dead of night. The subject line was a single gut-wrenching word: Isabella. My heart seized, a cold fist clenching in my chest. I fumbled for my glasses, my hands trembling so violently I could barely type my password. The message was brief, devoid of any humanity, just cold, brutal text. We have your daughter. She lives if you transfer full ownership of Aurasphere Tech to the account we designate. You have 72 hours. Tell no one, no police. We are watching. Follow the instructions in the next email. Disobey and we send her back to you in pieces. Attached was a photo. My Bella, my brilliant, beautiful girl, tied to a metal chair in a concrete room, a filthy gag in her mouth. Her eyes, wide with a terror I had never seen, were pleading directly into the camera, directly at me. The world tilted on its axis. The retirement I had sacrificed, the pension I had liquidated, 250 my entire financial safety net. It had all been for this, to fund the startup that had now become her death warrant. And I knew, with a certainty that turned my blood to ice, that the man behind this, the architect of this nightmare, was the very man I toasted just months ago. Julian, her charismatic business partner. It had all seemed so perfect, so full of promise. Bella had burst into my kitchen 6 months ago, her face lit with the uncontainable fire of a new idea. "Mom, you have to hear this. It's called Aurasphere," she'd gushed, talking a mile a minute about AI-driven personal wellness, adaptive soundscapes, and a proprietary algorithm that could curate a user's emotional state. It sounded like magic, but her passion was real. And then she introduced Julian. He was handsome, charming, with a disarming smile, and the polished pitch of a seasoned entrepreneur. He was the business brains, she said, the Stanford MBA to her MIT tech genius. He had the connections, the venture capital leads. All they needed was seed funding to build a working prototype. "We just need a bridge, Mom," Bella had pleaded, her hand on mine. "Just until the Series A funding comes through. You'll get every penny back, with interest. It's a sure thing." I saw the way she looked at him, a mixture of professional admiration and something more, something softer. I thought it was love. I was a fool. I signed over my pension, a slow-motion act of self-immolation I had mistaken for a mother's love. The transfer was for Aurasphere Tech LLC, but the bank account, I would later discover in my frantic investigation after the kidnapping, was under a different name entirely: Julian Markov Holdings. Subscribe for more stories of shocking betrayals and heart-stopping suspense. The first 12 hours were a blur of silent, suffocating panic. I was a ghost in my own home, jumping at every creak, staring at my phone until my vision blurred. The next email came exactly on time, 24 hours after the first. It contained a link to a secure, encrypted file transfer portal and a string of numbers, a cryptocurrency wallet address. The instructions were chillingly precise. I was to upload the signed, notarized documents, transferring my 49% stake and Bella's 51% stake in Aurasphere Tech to this anonymous digital wallet. Once the blockchain confirmed the transaction, they would release Bella at a location they would provide. Any delay is a gamble with her life, the email ended. The clock is ticking. I couldn't go to the police. The threat was too explicit. "We are watching." Were they watching the house? Had they tapped my phone? Was the kindly old man walking his dog outside a sentry for a monster? My mind raced, trapped in a nightmare of my own making. I had to think, to find a leverage they hadn't anticipated. Julian wanted the company. He had orchestrated this entire elaborate scheme, from seducing my daughter to swindling my life savings. And now, he was taking the final, violent step to claim the prize. But he had made one mistake. He had underestimated a mother's desperation. I couldn't fight him with force, but I could fight him with his own weapon: the business. I spent the next day in a frenzied, clandestine hunt. I called in a favor from an old friend, a retired, discreet private investigator named Frank. I couldn't tell him the truth, only that I needed a deep, urgent background check on Julian Markov and any shell companies linked to him. Meanwhile, I pretended to comply. I drafted the ownership transfer documents, making a show of going to a notary public, my performance of a terrified, compliant mother worthy of an Oscar. I hoped the cameras, if they were there, caught every feigned tremor of my hand. Frank's report arrived in fragments, each email more terrifying than the last. Julian Markov was a ghost. The Stanford MBA was a forgery. His entire identity was a sophisticated fabrication. But Frank had dug deeper, into the dark web, following the digital footprints of the shell companies. Aurasphere Tech LLC, he wrote, is a subsidiary of a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. That company is wholly owned by a shell corporation known as Orion Imports. My blood ran cold. Orion Imports. I knew that name. It was a company that had been briefly mentioned in a news report I'd seen years ago, linked to a European organized crime syndicate known for money laundering and corporate theft. This wasn't just a greedy con man. Julian was a foot soldier for something much larger, much more dangerous. Bella wasn't just a hostage for a startup. She was a pawn in a transnational criminal enterprise. The $250,000 wasn't the goal. It was a minor expense. They wanted the intellectual property, the AI algorithm Bella had built, the true, priceless asset of Aurasphere, and they were willing to kill for it. The third email arrived with 12 hours left on the clock. It wasn't just text this time. It was a video, a 10-second clip. Julian's voice, smooth as silk, utterly devoid of the charm I remembered, whispered from my speakers. "Time to make the transfer, Eleanor. Prove your love." The camera panned to Bella. She was paler, a fresh bruise blooming on her cheekbone. She tried to speak, her voice a ragged sob against the gag. "Mom, please." Then the video ended. Something inside me broke. The fear shattered, and in its place rose a white-hot, incandescent rage. They had hit her. They had dared to lay a hand on my child. They thought I was a helpless old woman. They were wrong. I opened the transfer portal, my fingers steady now, my mind clear and cold as ice. I had the signed documents ready, but I had uploaded a different file first. A file Frank had helped me create. A digital poison pill. It was a logic bomb disguised as the corporate charter, programmed to trigger upon the transfer of ownership. It wouldn't just give them the company, it would encrypt and permanently delete the core code of Aurasphere, rendering the entire intellectual property worthless. It was a gamble of apocalyptic proportions. If they discovered it, they would kill her for sure. But if I did nothing, they would get what they wanted and had no reason to keep her alive. I was betting everything that their greed would blind them to the trap. I took a deep breath, my finger hovering over the mouse. I was no longer just saving my daughter. I was declaring war. My finger clicked the mouse. The screen flashed. Upload complete. A progress bar appeared, crawling with agonizing slowness toward 100%. Each percentage point felt like a year being shaved off my life. I had just launched a missile into the heart of my daughter's prison, and I had no idea if it would be her salvation or her death warrant. The silence in my study was deafening, broken only by the frantic thumping of my own heart. I expected the phone to ring, for a new email to scream into my inbox, for Julian's furious face to appear on my screen, condemning me for my betrayal. But nothing happened. The digital world remained silent. The only thing that changed was the clock. The 72-hour deadline was now 11 hours and 43 minutes away. The next 6 hours were a new kind of torture. The waiting was no longer passive. It was an active, visceral agony. Every creak of the house was Julian's footstep. Every car that passed was his henchman coming for me. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sit. I paced, my mind racing through 1,000 horrific outcomes. Had they tried to access the code? Had the logic bomb detonated? Was Bella paying the price for my audacity right now? I checked the blockchain explorer for the cryptocurrency wallet. The transfer of ownership had been confirmed. Aurasphere Tech now belonged to a string of anonymous letters and numbers. Julian had won. He had my money and my company. All he had to do now was make good on his side of the deal. But criminals who kidnapped and assaulted young women were not known for their honor. With 5 hours left, my phone finally buzzed. It wasn't an email. It was a text message from an unknown number. The simplicity of it was somehow more terrifying than the encrypted emails. Location sent. Come alone. No police. You have 1 hour. A second later, a pin dropped on a map application on my phone. It was an isolated, derelict warehouse in the industrial sector. A place that looked like it had been abandoned for decades. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a public drop-off point. This was a place where things and people could disappear without a trace. They weren't planning to release Bella. They were luring me into the same trap. A new, even more chilling thought gripped me. What if they had discovered my sabotage? What if this was a setup to eliminate us both? The mother who knew too much, and the daughter who was now a liability. I felt a surge of pure, undiluted fear. I was a 68-year-old woman. I was no match for armed criminals. Going there alone was a suicide mission. But I was also a mother. I couldn't go to the police. The text was clear, but I couldn't go entirely unarmed. I thought of Frank, the private investigator. He was ex-military, tough and discreet. I called him, my voice a shaky whisper. "Frank, I need you. It's life or death. My daughter. They have her. They want me to come to a warehouse. I need you to be my shadow. Don't intervene unless it's over." I gave him the address. "Please, just be my eyes. If something happens to me, you'll know who to tell." There was a long pause on the other end. "Eleanor, this is way beyond my pay grade. This is a job for the FBI. And if they're watching the police, if they see a single cop car and kill her, I can't take that chance, Frank. I'm going. With or without you." The line went silent for a moment longer. "I'll be there," he grunted. "But this is a bad idea, one of the worst I've ever heard." I didn't need him to tell me that. I hung up, my decision made. I changed into dark, practical clothing and running shoes. A pathetic preparation for a confrontation, but the best I could do. I drove toward the industrial sector, my headlights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. The city slowly faded away, replaced by the skeletal remains of its industrial past. The warehouse was exactly as the map had shown, a hulking, rusted monolith surrounded by a chain-link fence with sagging, torn openings. I parked a quarter-mile away, as instructed, my old sedan looking absurdly out of place. The final text came. Walk to the main entrance, now. My hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. This was it. I sent a quick final text to Frank with my location, and the message, going in now. Then I got out of the car and started walking, the cold night air biting through my jacket. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound was a trigger being cocked. The main entrance was a giant rolling door, but a smaller, human-sized door was cut into it, slightly ajar. It was a dark open mouth. I pushed it open and stepped into the cavernous, echoing space. The air was thick with the smell of oil, dust, and decay. Dim grey light filtered through grime-caked windows high above, illuminating swirling motes of dust. Hello? I called out, my voice small and swallowed by the immense space. A figure emerged from the shadows near the far wall. Julian. He was alone. He looked calm, impeccably dressed in a dark coat, as if he were about to attend a board meeting instead of a hostage exchange. He smiled, that same disarming smile that had once filled me with hope. Now it filled me with a primal dread. Eleanor, so good of you to come. I trust you had a pleasant journey, he said, his voice echoing. Where is my daughter? I demanded, my voice stronger than I felt. All in good time. First, a small piece of business, he said, pulling a tablet from his coat. He tapped the screen and held it up. It showed the Aurasphere source code repository. It seems there's a problem. The core algorithm files. They're corrupted, unreadable. A strange coincidence, don't you think? Happening just moments after you transferred ownership. My heart stopped. He knew, he had tested it. I stood my ground, the fear hardening into a block of ice in my stomach. I have no idea what you're talking about. It was fine when I uploaded it. Your systems must have a virus. His smile didn't falter, but his eyes turned dead, like a shark's. We both know that's not true, Eleanor. You tried to be clever. A dangerous game to play with your daughter's life. He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. But I'm a reasonable man. Fix it now. Log in and restore the files from your backup. Do that, and you can both walk out of here. It was a lie. I could see it in his eyes. The moment he had the functional code, we were both dead. He had no intention of letting us go. We were loose ends. I had nothing left to bargain with. My only weapon had been discovered. I can't, I said, my voice trembling with a genuine final despair. There is no backup. The transfer was final. You have everything. Julian's smile finally vanished. The mask of civility dropped completely, revealing the vicious predator beneath. Then you have made a very, very costly mistake. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers. From the deep shadows behind him, two large men emerged, dragging a stumbling hooded figure between them. It was Bella. They threw her to her knees on the concrete floor. One of the men ripped the hood off. She was crying, her face bruised and streaked with dirt. But her eyes, when they met mine, were alive with a fierce, terrified love. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, she sobbed. Julian pulled a pistol from his waistband, the metal glinting dully in the dim light. He didn't point it at Bella. He pointed it directly at me. You had one job, Eleanor. Now, because of your sentimentality, your daughter gets to watch you die. And then, well, Orion Imports has other uses for pretty young tech geniuses in their overseas operations. She'll wish she'd died with you. He cocked the hammer. The sound was obscenely loud in the silent warehouse. I looked at Bella, trying to pour a lifetime of love into a single final glance. This was it. I had failed. Subscribe to find out if Eleanor and Bella survived their deadly confrontation. The gunshot was a thunderclap that ripped through the cavernous warehouse. I flinched, a scream trapped in my throat, my eyes squeezing shut in a futile attempt to block out the end. But the searing pain of a bullet never came. Instead, there was a sharp cry of pain, the clatter of metal on concrete, and a string of guttural curses. My eyes flew open. Julian was clutching his hand, blood welling between his fingers. His pistol lay spinning on the floor a few feet away. A rock, roughly the size of a baseball, clattered to a stop beside it. From a high, rusted gantry above, a voice roared, "Get away from them, you son of a bitch!" Frank. He was perched like an avenging angel, a second rock already in his hand. He hadn't just been my shadow. He had become my guardian, armed with nothing but his wits and the debris of the decaying building. The two thugs holding Bella froze in shock, their grip loosening. It was the only opening she needed. My brilliant, fierce daughter, seeing her chance, drove her elbow back with all her strength into one man's groin. He grunted and doubled over. The other, startled, reached for her, but she was already moving, scrambling away from them on her hands and knees. The moment of stunned silence shattered. "Get them!" Julian snarled, his voice a mask of fury and pain as he dove for his gun. Frank didn't hesitate. He hurled the second rock, not at Julian, but at a bank of grimy windows high on the wall opposite him. The glass exploded inwards, a cascade of shards catching the first rays of the rising sun and scattering prismatic light across the scene. The distraction was perfect. "Bella! Run to the door!" I screamed, my body finally unlocking from its paralysis. I didn't run for the exit. I ran toward Julian, toward the gun. It was the stupidest, most reckless act of my life, but it was the only thing I could think to do. If he got that gun back, we were all dead. Time seemed to slow. I saw Frank scrambling down a rickety ladder from the gantry. I saw the two thugs recovering, one still hobbling, the other starting after Bella. And I saw Julian's fingers slick with blood, close around the grip of the pistol. I launched myself forward in a desperate, feet-first slide, my body a human broomstick aimed at his legs. I connected just as he was raising the weapon. It wasn't a powerful impact, but it was enough. He stumbled, crying out as his injured hand smashed against the concrete. The gun skittered away again, into the deeper shadows under a piece of rusted machinery. We were on the floor, a tangle of limbs and desperation. Julian was younger, stronger, and fueled by a killer's rage. He backhanded me across the face with his good hand. White-hot stars exploded behind my eyes, but the pain was a distant thing. All I could feel was a raw animal need to keep him down, to keep him away from that gun. I clawed at his face, my fingernails digging into his skin. I was a wild animal fighting for my cub. "Mom!" Bella's scream cut through the chaos. She hadn't run. She had picked up a length of rusty steel pipe and was charging the thug who was closing in on Frank. Frank, now on the ground, was trading brutal blows with the other one. My daughter, my baby, was fighting for our lives. My struggle with Julian was a losing battle. He pinned me, his weight crushing the air from my lungs. His good hand closed around my throat, squeezing. "You stupid old woman." He spat, his face a mask of hatred inches from mine. The edges of my vision began to darken. I could hear Bella screaming, Frank grunting in pain. Then, a new sound, a sound so beautiful, so profoundly hopeful. It brought tears to my eyes even as I was being strangled. Sirens. Distant at first, then growing rapidly closer, a chorus of wails splitting the dawn. "Dozens of them!" Julian froze, his grip loosening slightly. The thugs fighting Frank and Bella also stopped, their heads whipping toward the sound. Frank, seizing the opportunity, landed a solid punch that sent his opponent reeling. Bella stood panting, the pipe held high, her eyes wide. "How?" Julian whispered, his face a picture of stunned betrayal. He looked down at me, realization dawning. "The investigator. You didn't come alone." I managed a choked, bloody smile. "You're not the only one who can be clever." I had sent one more text to Frank, just before I got out of the car. A single word. Police. And the address. I had broken the kidnapper's primary rule, betting that when the chaos started they wouldn't have time to carry out their threat. I had bet our lives on the response time of the city's finest. And I had won. The warehouse doors burst open with a deafening crash. "Police! Everyone on the ground! Now!" The space flooded with armed officers in tactical gear, their flashlight beams cutting through the dust-filled air. Julian released my throat, raising his hands slowly, his expression one of pure, impotent fury. The two thugs immediately dropped to their knees. The fight was over. I lay on the cold concrete, gasping for air, as officers swarmed around us, securing the scene. Bella dropped the pipe and rushed to my side, collapsing beside me and pulling me into a sobbing embrace. "Mom, oh God, Mom, I'm so sorry," she cried over and over, her tears mixing with the blood on my face. Frank was being helped up by an officer, his face bruised but his eyes triumphant. He gave me a slow, respectful nod. It was over. We were safe. But as I held my daughter, watching Julian Markov being handcuffed and read his rights, a new cold dread began to uncoil in my stomach. He wasn't looking at the police with fear. He was looking at me, and his smile was back. It was a small, chilling smirk, filled with a sinister promise. He was just an employee, a contractor. He had said the name himself. Orion Imports. We had survived the soldier. But I had just declared war on the entire army, and as they led him away, I knew, with a certainty that froze my soul, that this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The aftermath was a blur of sterile lights and endless questions. The police station, the hospital, the gentle but firm probing of detectives. It all passed in a haze of exhaustion and shock. Bella was treated for dehydration and minor bruises, the physical ones at least. The psychological wounds, we both knew, would take far longer to heal. I sat by her hospital bed, holding her hand as she finally fell into a drugged, fitful sleep, her fingers still tightly clutching mine. The image of Julian's smirk as he was led away was burned into my mind. It was the look of a man who still held a winning card. The lead detective, a weary but kind man named Evans, confirmed my fears later that day. "He's not talking," he said, sipping bitter station coffee. "Not a word. He's asked for a lawyer, a high-powered one from the city. The two men with him are low-level muscle. They're scared, but they don't know anything about this Orion Imports. They were hired for a one-time job, intimidation and babysitting." He looked at me, his expression grim. Mrs. Price, without Julian's testimony, and with the digital trail being so convoluted, it's going to be very hard to make a case against anyone higher up. We have him on the kidnapping and assault. That will put him away for a long time. But the people he works for, they're ghosts. I felt a profound weariness settle into my bones. We had survived, but we hadn't won. The shadow of Orion Imports still loomed. They had lost a soldier and their prize, the Orosphere Code, which was now a worthless, encrypted lump of data thanks to my logic bomb. They would be furious, and an organization that could orchestrate something this elaborate would not simply accept the loss. A week later, we were back in my home, a place that no longer felt like a sanctuary. The doors were double-locked, the alarm system armed, but the fear was a third, unwelcome occupant in every room. Bella was a ghost of her former self, jumping at every sound, her brilliant mind shrouded in a fog of anxiety and guilt. "It's all my fault, Mom," she'd whisper, staring blankly at the wall. "I was so stupid. I trusted him. I lost everything you had." "You lost nothing," I told her fiercely, pulling her into a hug. "I have you. That's all that matters." But I knew my words were a bandage on a gaping wound. The financial ruin was absolute. My pension was gone. The house was all I had left, and the property taxes were due. It was in this atmosphere of quiet despair that a plain legal-sized envelope arrived in the mail. No return address. My name and address were typed in a generic font. Inside there was no letter, just a single glossy photograph. It was a picture of a young boy, no more than 8 years old, with bright red hair and a smattering of freckles across his nose. He was laughing, kicking a soccer ball in a sun-drenched park. He looked happy, carefree, and utterly vulnerable. My blood ran cold. I didn't know who he was, but the message was as clear as it was monstrous. It was a threat, a new target. They were showing me they could reach anyone, anywhere. This was their response. This was their promise of retaliation. I sank into a chair, the photograph trembling in my hand. We couldn't live like this. We couldn't spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The police had done all they could. It was time for a different strategy. It was time to stop being the prey. That night, while Bella slept, I went into my study and powered up my old computer. I opened the encrypted files Frank had sent me. the ones detailing the labyrinthine connections of Julian's shell companies leading back to Orion Imports. The police saw a dead end. I saw a map. I couldn't fight them with guns or lawyers, but I could fight them with the one thing they truly valued: their reputation. Orion Imports, according to Frank's deep web sources, was a chameleon. Its power lay in its legitimacy, its ability to move dirty money through clean channels. They were like a vampire. They couldn't stand the light. I began to write. I wrote down everything. The entire story, from Bella's excited pitch to the chilling photograph of the unknown boy. I included scanned copies of the bank transfers, the kidnapping emails, the police reports, and Frank's investigative findings. I compiled it all into a single damning document. It wasn't just a story. It was a weapon. The next morning, I called Frank. "I need one more thing," I said, my voice steady. "I need the names. The real names of the board members of Orion Imports. The respectable, public-facing ones." He was silent for a long moment. "Eleanor, that is diving into very deep, very dangerous water." "I'm already drowning, Frank," I replied. "I'm just choosing how I go down." He delivered the list 2 days later. It was a short, powerful list of names: a shipping magnate in Hamburg, a retired politician in London, a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley. Pillars of their communities, all of them. I didn't send my document to the police or the newspapers. That would be a scattered, messy blast. I needed a precision strike. I attached the document to 5 separate emails. I wrote a short, simple message in the body of each. "You have 48 hours to publicly dissolve Orion Imports and divest all assets. If you do not, this document and all supporting evidence will be sent to the financial regulators, intelligence agencies, and major news outlets in your respective countries. You have hidden in the shadows for too long. Your time is up," I sent the emails. And then I waited. I showed the photograph of the boy to Bella and told her my plan. For the first time since her rescue, I saw a flicker of the old fire in her eyes. Not the fire of a dreamer, but the fire of a fighter. "They tried to break us, Mom," she said, her jaw set. "They didn't know who they were dealing with." The 48-hour deadline passed in a silence more terrifying than any threat. Then, on the morning of the 3rd day, the news broke. It was a small business section headline at first. "Orion Imports, citing strategic shifts, announces immediate dissolution." Within hours, it was a full-blown story. The venture capitalist in Silicon Valley gave a terse, no-comment interview outside his office. The shipping magnate in Hamburg released a statement about pursuing new opportunities. They had folded. The vampires had retreated from the dawn. A week later, a formal typed letter arrived from a law firm representing the now-defunct Orion Imports. It was a single sentence. "The matter is concluded. We were finally, truly, free. The financial damage was done. We had to sell the house. We moved into a small apartment. A fresh start with no ghosts in the corners." Bella slowly began to rebuild. She didn't go back to tech. She started a non-profit, helping other victims of financial fraud, using her painful experience as a shield for others. One evening, as we unpacked a box in our new living room, I found the photograph of the red-haired boy. I didn't know who he was, and I never would. I didn't know if he was a real target or just a stock photo used to terrorize me. It didn't matter. I walked to the kitchen, struck a match, and watched his smiling face curl and blacken in the sink, the ashes washing down the drain. I had gone into that warehouse a terrified mother, willing to die for her child. I had emerged something else. A woman who had stared into the abyss of a powerful hidden evil and forced it to blink. They had taken my money, my security, and my peace of mind. But in the end, they had given me the one thing I never knew I possessed: the unshakable knowledge that a mother's love, when forged in fire, could be the most powerful and dangerous force on Earth.